folks, it's Amy from Colorado Mountain Living. We're going to actually do a check on the bees today, but it's probably not what you think. So it's midwinter, and I think a lot of people wonder if they live in a wintry climate, what are you supposed to do with your bees in the winter, and how do you check on them to make sure they're doing okay? So I'm going to hopefully answer some of those questions today. We are end of January, February right around the corner, and it's the coldest time of the year. It's about 30 degrees right now. It's snowing lightly, but also the sun is out, so that's kind of cool. It's making it a little nicer to be outside, but it's cold. The bees are hibernating in a state of torpor, so you're not going to see the bees. But let's go over a few things that you can do midwinter to check on your bees and make sure things are going okay. So our setup is like a mountain setup. We've got an electrified fence to keep out predators, and you can see there's a lot of snow around the hives. So the first thing I would check on this time of year is to see how the solar system is doing. Now, you can see the grounding rod right there. The solar unit itself is exposed, and if you look down at the blinking light, it's indicating that the fence is okay. So there is still a current getting around the fence. Now, is that current grounded out? I don't really feel like testing that today myself, but we should walk the perimeter to see how much the snow is potentially grounding out the fence. And of course, it might not matter because our biggest predator up here are bears, and right now we know that the bears are hibernating. So that's not really a huge threat for the bees. The security of the solar fence isn't as big of a priority as it is during the spring and the fall. The fencing itself is about 8 inches off the ground, and we still have plenty of clearance on the front side of the fence. We don't have any vegetation touching the fence. We don't have any snow grounding out the fence. And as we round the corner, we see that there's still contact points of the fence touching each other, so we know that there is good connection. Now, as we get into this back corner, you can see where some of the fence dips into the snow. So this could be a potential point for the fence grounding out, as well as this back corner here. You can see the bottom of the fence right here. This middle T-post, there's more drifting right here. Miraculously, the back corner is clear. But look at the snow drifting in that corner right there. So that kind of gives you a good indication of maybe your spring buildup. So thinking about when bears are more of a problem in the spring, maybe April, maybe May, they start coming out. You still have a potential for big snowstorms. So keeping an eye on the snow buildup along the bottom of your fence would be a good thing to watch out for. But this time of year, it's just good to take stock of where the risk areas are. So that's what we're doing. I'm not going to clear away the snow today just because it's not a risk for the next few months. I would say the number one thing you can do in the midwinter time is take an assessment of the security of your fence enclosure and make sure that the solar fencing itself is still operational. All right, so number 2, what else can we do to make sure that the bees are okay? I think just making an assessment for snow drifts. So in addition to grounding out your fence, this can kind of give you an indication of how the hives are faring through the wind, and it might give you indication of how you might set up windbreaks in the future. So you can see how some of the drifting is in front of the hives there. In the hives, they almost seem like they're a little bit twisted. Like I feel like they were a little bit more in line, but we've had so much heavy snow that I think that they've twisted a little bit with some of the wind. Who knows? I could just be imagining it. But then if I look head on at these hives, they do seem a little bit twisted, but nothing that puts them in danger, right? But just I would take stock of the snow drifting and how the wind is affecting the hives. But I would add that this is our 3rd winter, and this is the bees have never really had a windbreak. In fact, this is probably the most secure that they've been with their insulated enclosures to protect from the wind. So I think they're better off this winter than they have been in winters past. But it's always a good idea to think about wind risk for bees, and we are at a very high wind area, like you've seen in some of our past videos, with power outages from trees blowing down with 50-mile-an-hour plus wind gusts, and we're on the side of a hill. You know these beehives are getting hammered for wind, and there was even a video where the hive cover blew off after a storm But right now they're pretty secure. They all have rocks on them. Okay, so the third thing to look at, I would inspect in the wintertime, is to make an assessment about the insulation covers. How are they holding up? Have they shifted at all? So let's take a look. This year I did buy new specialty covers for the beehives. You can see they're these black vinyl panels that Velcro all the way around the hives. And they have been holding up quite well, I would say. I mean, all three of them are still on here. I did have trouble getting one of the corners Velcroed adequately. This back corner right here, you could see the corner wasn't quite all the way. It was just a little fatter towards the bottom for some reason. I couldn't really get that one to be closed, but despite all the wind, they are holding up really, really well. It's the Easy On Beehive cover, as you can see on the label right there, and I'm really, really pleased with them. They seem to be doing really well, holding up with the wind and just staying put on the hives like they're supposed to be. And then I like to look at the entrances to see what kind of activity, if any, there is. I think there's been zero activity because I don't see any dead bees. Usually as the weather warms up, the bees take advantage of that and they clear out some of their dead bees from the inside of the hive. But, you know, there's snow. You can't really tell a lot of activity. There's a little bit in this hive. Let's see if I can get close enough to it. You can just see a little bit on this entrance, just some dead bee bodies at the entrance there. And then if they ever have a day where it's, 50 and sunny, they come out and they kind of dump those bodies out. But we haven't had any weather like that. Nothing close in the last few weeks. And the biggest question that people might have is, are the bees still alive? How are they even alive in there? I think you could use a infrared thermometer, infrared camera to detect heat inside the hives. But there are a couple ways you can do this unofficially if you don't have advanced equipment like that, and I don't today. It might be something I invest in. So there's two more things I think you can do in the wintertime. One is to listen for bee activity. And today I'm actually going to use a stethoscope to do that. So luckily, Brian's in the medical field and he's got extra stethoscopes lying around. So I'm going to put this on and see if I can hear any kind of buzzing in the hives. Now, some people, what they do is they knock on the hive, but I know that's not recommended because it can disrupt the cluster that they're in, and we don't want them to lose any heat, especially on a day like today where it's 30 degrees. So I'm just hoping that if I listen with a stethoscope, I might be able to hear just some kind of light buzzing. Okay, the verdict is I can't hear a thing. Not because the instrument's not sensitive, but there's all that insulation on the hives, and I think because I'm being pretty quiet and gentle, not making a big racket, the bees are pretty much staying put in their cluster, so they're not making a lot of buzzing, which is fine. That's not the only way to be able to tell. Another way that you can tell if the bees are still in the hive during the winter is if you do get a snow, and not a super duper heavy snow, but like a light snow, maybe a couple of inches, you'll find that the snow on the hive top starts to melt. You'll see that more heat can be released from the top of the hive, and it's almost like in a circular pattern, and you know that it's because heat's coming up from the hive. So I guess the other two things you could do to know for sure is to use one of those gun thermometers, infrared thermometers, or an infrared camera to detect heat in the hive. So I don't have that equipment with me today, but it's something you could pick up if you're really curious about the health of the survival of your bees in the middle of the winter. Or just use the snow test. If you see that the snow seems to be melting because of some kind of rising heat, then you know that there's some viability in that hive and heat in that hive from the bees. So that's about all what we can do right now for, the end of January, early February, check on the bees in the winter. Really not a lot. You can't get your hands in there. You can't take the lid off. you can't be knocking on the hives, irritating the bees and causing them a lot of stress in the middle of the winter when they're hibernating. So you really just kind of want to leave them alone. Just make sure their enclosure is good and make any evaluations about wind and how the hive is holding up in severe weather like winter blizzards and high winds. So that's about it right now for Colorado mountain living and our bees. But I'm hoping we'll get some warmer weather, February, March, maybe some 50-degree days, and we can do a little bit more checking on the bees. All right, guys, that's the update from the bee yard. We'll see you next time. Bye.